here at Schaumburg, milepost 26.6 on Metra's Milwaukee District West line. Just to the east of the station are a pair of eastbound intermediate signals. The signal for Main 2 is showing a green over red, clear. This signal tells me I can definitely expect a train to be coming on Main 2, and probably pretty soon. But how do I know this? Why do I know the next set of signals east is located at a crossover? And why do I know the train will not be taking that crossover? This is a quick crash course in how to read Metra signals. Metra is the commuter rail branch of the Regional Transportation Authority, or RTA. As of 2022, Metra operates 11 lines to and from Chicago's 4 remaining rail terminals. Of these lines, 5 are owned and operated by Metra: the Southwest Service, the Rock Island District, the Electric District, and 2 Milwaukee District lines. 3 are operated by Union Pacific using Metra rolling stock, 1 is operated by BNSF using the same arrangement, and 2, the Heritage Corridor and the North Central Service, are operated by Metra using trackage rights on Canadian National. Additionally, any train that comes into or out of Union Station operates over Amtrak trackage, as they own Union Station. But back to the Milwaukee District. Although the line is owned and maintained by Metra, it is actually controlled by Canadian Pacific. CP's Soo Line subsidiary was the railroad to purchase what was left of the Milwaukee Road in 1986, and Metra, who had been operating the commuter trains for the bankrupt Milwaukee Road for a few years by then, took ownership of the line with the Soo Line in charge of controlling it. Soo Line was consolidated in the 90s into the parent Canadian Pacific. Therefore, this line is also known as the CP Elgin sub, with CP's massive Bensonville yard in the middle of it. Only a handful of freights run out this far, though, with the daily Bensonville to Davenport, Iowa 473 being the only one that regularly does it in daylight. But that's not why we're here. Because this line is owned by Metra, it's subject to Metra's operating rules, including signals. Luckily for us rail fans, Metra's signal rules are pretty simple. Before we get into aspects, let's go over a couple signal basics. All Metra-owned lines use centralized traffic control, meaning nearly all aspects of the line, including switches and some signals, are controlled remotely by a dispatcher. There are 2 different types of signals in CTC territory. Absolute signals are dispatcher-controlled and also called home signals by some railroads. These are normally located at switches and crossovers, but can be located everywhere. They are identified by a name, usually of the control point they're located at. Here we have an example of absolute signals at CPE 023 on Union Pacific's Kenosha sub, also known as the Union Pacific North Line. The control point is named after the milepost and is identified on the gray signal shack on the left side. Absolute signals are always red unless something is lined through them. Intermediate signals are automatic block signals placed in between absolutes. They cannot be controlled by a dispatcher and usually aren't even visible on their dispatch displays. These can easily be differentiated by the presence of a number plate, usually the milepost they're located at, but some railroads chose to number theirs sequentially, but that's fairly rare. Signal aspects mean the same thing whether the signal is an absolute or an intermediate, with one exception. Intermediate signals are permissive signals. While a red on an absolute signal means stop, no questions asked, a red on an intermediate signal means restricting, continue at restricted speed. On some railroads, this means stop then proceed, but we're talking about Metra here, and they use restricting. Metra uses what's called a route signal system. Signal aspects do not govern speed adjustments per se like they do on CSX or Norfolk Southern, but rather tell a train which route it will be taking, with the train adjusting its speed accordingly. Metra uses signals with up to 3 heads. The top head on a 3-light signal is the same as a single head. Heads get added from top to bottom. There are 4 basic signal aspects that Metra signals can display: green, yellow, flashing yellow, and red. Green is clear, continue at maximum authorized speed. Yellow means approach, continue expecting to stop at the next signal. If traveling at more than 40 miles per hour, immediately slow to that speed. Red is what we discussed previously, stop on an absolute signal and restricting on an intermediate. Passing a stop signal requires specific permission, and doing so without can get a crew fired. Finally, advance approach is an approach for an approach. Continue prepared to pass the next signal at no more than 40 miles per hour and stop at the next signal after that. Rarely you may also see a white indication, or lunar. This is used on absolute signals to indicate restricting. A lunar indication on an absolute signal means the exact same thing as a red on an intermediate signal. If the top light on the signal is anything other than red, the reds below it have no meaning. Think of it this way. Look at this signal at Schaumburg again. If you can remove the bottom head or heads and the aspect doesn't change, then you can just ignore them. This signal at Schaumburg would read clear whether it had 1 head, 3 heads, or 15 heads. Let's look closer at these bottom heads. Why do they only have 2 lights? We already talked about that with route signal systems, additional heads indicate signals for diverging routes, but there aren't any here, so why is that bottom head there? Well, there's one more signal indication. A yellow over yellow approach diverging. Proceed prepared to take diverging route at the next signal at prescribed speed through turnouts. There's no reason these signals here would ever need to show a green light on the bottom, so they don't have one. The next signals east are located at a crossover, West Roselle, which is why these signals have the additional head. If a train was taking that crossover, this signal would be at approach diverging. Note that this is not the same as an approach and does not necessarily tell you the condition of the actual diverging signal. It could be a diverging clear, diverging approach, or diverging advance approach. These aspects mean the same thing as their normal counterpart, but with the additional qualifier to take the diverging route at prescribed speed until clear of it. Let's come back here to Schaumburg. We don't even need to see the signal at West Roselle to know it is either advance approach or clear. If it was anything less, this signal would not be clear. West Roselle is an absolute signal, and if nothing was lined through it, it would be red, and this signal would be at approach. The signal on the left, though, on main 1, shows a red restricting. Remember, this is an intermediate signal, so it is not stop. We know that intermediate signals are always the least restrictive aspect possible based on line conditions, so does this mean that a train is in the block ahead? Not necessarily. Lines with multiple main tracks have a current of traffic generally. Here on Metra and most places in the US, this is right-handed, but you will occasionally find some that run left-handed like the former Chicago and Northwestern lines. In order to understand why that signal's red, we need to talk a little about the absolute permissive block system. In basic terms, if a train enters a route on single track, all the automatic signals for the opposite direction to the next siding will tumble down to red in order to protect against opposing movements. In CTC systems, these signals on the wrong track will remain at red unless something's lined through them, after which they act just like regular automatic signals. In the old days, it required a lever at 2 interlocking towers to be activated to turn these signals on, so to speak. Of course, this is all electronic now. So there could be a train coming on the track, but the signal does not necessarily tell us that. The next westbound signal is another intermediate, with an absolute East Bartlett after that. We can see the intermediate signal at Hanover Park, and it's at approach, meaning that East Bartlett is red, meaning nothing is lined through it, and probably nothing's coming. As we said, we can safely conclude the eastbound signal on Main 2 tells us that something is coming, and a few minutes later, the headlight of Metra 2716 comes around the corner from Hanover Park. Today, it's a relatively short 6-car consist, appropriate for a February Saturday mid-afternoon, being pushed by MP36PH-3C number 404 and led by cab car number 8548. After a brisk 30-second stop to load up the small handful of passengers that I could probably count on one hand, the engineer gives me a couple hits of the horn and a wave that I of course didn't catch on camera, and 2716 heads off to the next station stop at Roselle. signal here then gets knocked down to all red, indicating that the signal block is occupied. Once the train clears the signal at West Roselle, this signal at Schaumburg will improve to an approach. And that's it. Keep in mind that reading signals is not a replacement for being aware and paying attention. Always remain aware when you're around railroad tracks and expect a movement on any track at any time, even if it looks abandoned. We'll be seeing more of this line in the near future. But until then, stay safe, stay off the tracks, and thank you for watching the Northeastern Illinois Railfan YouTube channel.